Well, I was born in St. Paul out on West 7th Street area in the old Anchor Hospital, which is out near the uh, brewery out there. And so but I lived on the west side all my life. Uh, I lived over near Stryker Avenue and Winifred Street, and we lived there until I was about 5 years old. And then we moved up to Baker Street, 152 West Baker Street, and it's between Bidwell and Bellows, and it's still in St. Paul, but it's the west side. So, and then of course, that's where I was living when I joined the reserve. And of course, the reserve was basically on the west side because it's right underneath the Wabasha Street Bridge, and and I always thought I'd like to have one of those Navy white hats, white cap. I was 16 years old, and that was a big deal, and back in those days in the 30s, you didn't have anything, so something like that would be cool to have, we thought. So my dad worked for the Northern States Power Company, and he had a fellow that belonged to the Naval Reserve that worked in his area. So I asked him if he couldn't get one of those white hats for me. And the officer came back from my dad, and he said, well, no, we can't give any clothes away like that, but if you join the Naval Reserve, you get the whole uniform. So we thought that was pretty tricky. So my dad signed a paper saying I was 17 years old, and we joined up.
So what year was that you had joined?
1940.
Okay.
But it was in the latter part of the 1940, the last part. So, and that was after I joined up. Why they gave me all my clothes, and you had to stencil them all. Every piece of your clothing had to have your name stenciled on it. And then in October, August, I guess it was, I went on a 2-week cruise for the Naval Reserve up on Lake, we went down to the Great Lakes, and we were on a little boat down there. They called it a gunboat, but it was an old ship owned by some personal people, and they used it for training. And so the 47th Division is what I belonged to at the Naval Reserve. And I spent 2 weeks on that cruise, and they went to Lake Michigan, Lake Huron, Lake Superior, and then we came back from Lake Superior. And we and Morton got back, and we got the word that President Franklin Delano Roosevelt declared a national emergency, and the Naval Reserve was going to go on a 1-year tour now. But he said because it's near Thanksgiving and Christmas and all that, he'd wait until after the holidays. So we didn't leave until January 21st
of 1941.
1941. And we took a train down to California, and it was down to where what they called the Navy.
San Diego?
San Diego, yeah. I don't know why I have trouble with that, but that's where they had their Navy base there, and it was all and that's where they had all these old ships that they had built in World War I. Old 4-stack destroyers. They built like 250 of them for World War I, and that was the U.S.S. Ward was one of those.
Okay.
So they were they had them all lined up there and rusting away, for 22 years, and then they decided to put us in action again. So we scraped all the rust off of that thing and put red lead on it and painted it up and got it all set to go. So in February of 41, it was launched and recommissioned. The unit I was in, we all stuck together. There were 84 of us, and 84 enlisted men and 2 officers. and we just went all on a train, went down to California, and we stuck together there. And of course, that didn't make up the whole crew. There were about 10 regular Navy men brought onto the crew, and there were about 10 or so guys who had been retired from the Navy, fleet reserves they called them, and they activated them and put them on the ship too. And they were all older guys, all tattoos all over the place. This was something different. And that made up a crew of about 140, no, not 40, 120, about 125 crew. And so they get that put together. And we went up to Mare Island to get equipment. And
Mare Island is where?
That's in California.
California.
Yeah, that's where the ship was built back in 1940. I can't remember when it was way back when that's where it started. And the ship was built in 17 days, which was a record.
Wow.
They had a guy that knew how to, he did what they, instead of just laying the thing down and building the thing there piece by piece, why they had built it up in pieces in different sections and put it together, and then they brought the pieces over and they built that, put it all together in 17 days.
Wow.
It was a world's record or something. So that was very unique, but that was all done, of course, a long time ago. How tall was it? I don't know. I know one thing. It had a lookout. We didn't have a radar and stuff in those days. We had to climb an open rung ladder to a lookout station up.
Crow's nest?
Yeah, a crow's nest, and we were the crows. An open rung ladder, and that thing was 60 feet above the water line. And boy, you got up there, and it was really up, and it moved. When the ship rolled, it was like being in a carnival ride, waving back and forth, and then it would hit a wave, it would shudder. It was tough. It was dangerous to go up there. So it took us about 9 days to get to Hawaii, and then we were very glad to get there. So then we were the 80th Destroyer Division. There were three other destroyers, old ones just like ours down there. So we were that 80th Destroyer Division, and our job was to patrol. We'd each take a week patrolling the area just outside of the harbor mouth.
Okay.
There's a 2 square mile area where the local people aren't in there. They can't go in there to fish or anything like that. And we would just do lazy eights in there, and wait. People had to check in and out. Our submarines had to come in on the surface, and they had to leave on the surface to get out till they get out beyond that point. And then every morning, about 2 o'clock in the morning, or there would be 4 minesweepers would come out of the Pearl Harbor, and they'd sweep the area every morning, even though it's peacetime. They'd sweep that, make sure there weren't any mines laid in there. And they had seen, actually one of their ships had seen a periscope coming through the water about 4 o'clock in the morning.
Wow.
And we were called to, and we were on patrol. The ward was on patrol, and we had to go over there and try and find out where it was going. He said the periscope was headed toward the entrance to the harbor. So we went over there. Well, it's 2 in the morning, and it was not very good visibility, so we never saw anything there. But at about 6, a little after 6, not quite 6:30, at the entrance to the harbor, they have a net across there. It's not an anti-submarine net, but it's an anti-torpedo net.
Okay.
Because the entrance to the harbor gives you a clean shot at where the battleships were lined up inside the harbor, not far in there.
Okay.
So they had that. And the Japanese were smart enough to build these midget submarines because they know that the water in Pearl Harbor is only about 42 feet deep. so they had to have something less than that. And they were going to follow our ships in there. And we didn't know that the mother submarines, there were 5 of them, were carrying these little baby submarines.
Wow.
And but these so-called midget submarines are about 80 feet long, and they're only 6 feet in diameter, and they have only 2 men and 2 torpedoes. And they're just a long tube. So they 2 of them actually got in there through I don't know why. They just were smart enough to get in there. But anyway, they got in there. And it takes 40 minutes to open up that net that seals off the harbor. It takes about 40 minutes to open it and close it again. So when one of our ships would go in, they would follow one of them in there. And didn't draw much water, so they could get in there unnoticed. But this one happened to be, the one we saw, happened to be following one of our ships that was going in. And it was quite a ways behind it, and we couldn't figure out what it was because the conning tower is only big enough for 2 men to be in it, and of course it wasn't up in the air very high either. And so we were wondering why. What's this thing? We thought it was something got loose and was floating down there, but it was at the same time there was a PBY plane that flies around the island, checking to see that there's nobody making illegal alien landings there, and the Coast Guard also has a Coast Guard cutter goes around the island every day too to make sure that they do a lot of that, because you can't just come and land on Oahu and without permission.
So could you describe a typical, before December 7th, just what your typical day was like when you were on duty? From my understanding that in Pearl Harbor and really in Hawaii, it wasn't the tourist destination that it is now, and that there was just really not a lot there. That's what I've heard from some others who were stationed there before World War II.
Well, it wasn't. They didn't have much there. In fact, while we were there, they built a theater to go to. That was the thing to do. And they had a YMCA, Army and Navy YMCA, where they could go. A lot of the sailors would go ashore, and they'd get a locker in the YMCA, and they'd change to civilian clothes, and then the Navy wouldn't get blamed for all the trouble they'd start, because their main goal was to go drink beer and have a good time, But they had that theater opened up, and that was nice. But people went to the beach, they went swimming, and there was things to do. The weather was fine. You could go up in the mountains. You could take tours around the island for $5. You'd take a tour with like a cab or something, go around the island, and a lot of people did that. There were a lot of things to see, and it was good to go on the beach. And outside of that, it was people went to go have a good time, I guess.
So now,
but the only people that came there of any notoriety were movie stars. The movie stars used to come, and they'd get the word that there would be a movie star.
So did you ever meet Clark Gable?
No. But we saw one gal there. What was her name? I can't remember her name right now. Doggone it! But she was a very famous lady movie star. She was there. We saw her. But that was about it. That was the big excitement, to have a movie star there. But they only had two hotels. The Royal Hawaiian Hotel was very famous. That's where all the movie stars, the rich people, stayed. And that had a nice beach and stuff. And then there was one other hotel that was right on the main street there. But that was nice too. But that was it, 2 hotels.
Wow.
So, and the rest were all places. They had a place called, they can't remember right now. I don't know how I could forget it. It was a beer joint to go to that was very popular for the Navy guys to go to. Yeah, and it used to cost 50 cents to take a cab from the Navy, from Pearl Harbor into town. 50 cents. That was a lot of money for us because we were only I was only getting like $21 a month.
Wow, that is a lot.
Yeah, and because I was a minor, you had to send $10 home to your parents. But the popular drink in those days was a Cuba Libre. That was just because they liked. It was like little whiskey in a Coca-Cola.
Okay.
Says we really liked the Coca-Cola, but we wanted to be the men, you know.
Yeah.
So that's what happens a lot of times, yeah.
So now, from the time Reveille started to the time you were done with the day, on an average work day, what was that like? Can you walk us through that?
Well, you just had to get up in the morning early, and of course they had to stand watches. They had somebody right at the boats would go out where you had to have some boat crews available, so you needed a sailor to be the bow man, and you needed a guy to run the motor, and then you need the coxswain to steer it. So there's 3 men on there. They have to be on duty too, and they have to change every so often, and they take people back and forth. And captains would sometimes go ashore. They had their own boat, their own boat crew. But otherwise it was just scraping, wire brushing, getting the rust off, painting, and you did a lot of scraping and wire brushing, and that's what the crews did. And the people that were in the engine rooms where they had work to do down there too, so so it's just they had chores to do. And of course they have to clean the ship and paint it and everything, and of course the cooks they get up at 3 o'clock in the morning, and they had to get light off their
So
stove.
what was your duty assignment? Did they give you ratings back then?
Yeah,
And what were you rated as?
second class seaman. That
Okay.
was the base. See, when we were at St. Paul, we were apprentice seamen, but they can't put apprentice seamen on active duty. So when we went on active duty, we all got promoted to second class seaman. And then I was studying to be a typing, and I was good at that in high school, and that would be the what do they call that again?
Clerk?
Well, it's the guy they do all the typing of everything. I was trying to be that, but that position was already filled. So they said, well, they have a job called the Jack of the Dust. Every ship has it. It's an assigned duty by an officer, and he assigns you the duty, and your job is to take care of all the places that store the food. And so it's all canned, a lot of canned food. And you had to be down in the hold when they brought all the stores on board. You had to stack it where you wanted it so you could find it again. And the sugar come in 100-pound bags, the flour in 80-pound bags, and the coffee in 60-pound bags.
Wow.
And I was only 132 pounds, and I had to, and of course the galley was in the midships, and that store was way at the stern.
Oh.
And I had to know where that was. And then they had a big refrigerator mounted right on the weather deck on top. That kept all the food. The meat used to come in quarters in those days. They didn't have it all cut in little pieces later. Later on, after the war started, all the meat came already cut in small pieces and in boxes, so they could store a lot of it better. And because on the weather deck, they had a butcher block
Okay.
welded right to the deck. And we'd get like chickens that come with their heads and their feet on, but they'd have the already plucked, and they'd have the gizzards would be stored inside, and they were frozen. Well, the Jack of the Dust, he had to take care of that. He had to do the butchering, and he had to take care of that. So when you get these chickens, where the people that sold chickens really made money on that thing, we'd have to cut the head off and cut the feet off, and then pull some of the feathers that they missed off of there, and open up, take the gizzards out, because we could use that to make gravy and things like that. So you had to do those things. So that's what the Jack of the Dust was. And my name, and you get the nickname Dusty, comes with that. And I never was called anything, and for 5.5 years, but Dusty. That's the only name I would respond to. So that happened like that. So people were learning how to be torpedo men and how to be signalmen and all kinds of different things. You have to learn your job, is what it is. But you do a lot of paint scraping and painting and that. Yeah. And then you had the drills. You had the drills to get to general quarters. Everybody, even the cooks had I was a sight setter on a 4-inch gun, like the one they got down there. And you have the phones on, and you get the orders from the captain what to do, like when to load the guns and stuff. And do that, so they have to practice that, and they want to get that. There's 9 men to a gun crew.
Okay.
9 men. And you have to, they're all at different stations, and at nighttime they're probably sleeping. But the idea is they have to, when that alarm goes off for general quarters, they have to get to that gun within 3 minutes. That's what they aim for. So you do a lot of practicing with that. They just practice that all the time. So you probably could do that 5 or 6 times a day if they wanted to. And then, of course, then they have to have fire drills. And some people are told where the hoses are, and some people just carry a bucket of sand out to that area.
And so what did you carry on your fire drill?
Well, I didn't have a fire drill station. I was in the galley, of course.
Okay.
And cooks have to turn their range off and make sure everything's okay, and then go to your fire drill if you had one. And then they had abandoned ship drills, so you were assigned to a boat or something that would float, and they practiced doing that too. So you'd know where to go if you had abandoned ship. You'd go to that station.